Writing a great story is not always about fantastic plot twists or better characterization. Sometimes it's about having a great theme that just punches your reader in the soul. Most of your novel exists on a very horizontal plane. Most of the stuff we talk about on this channel is about characters and plot and dialogue and stuff like that. But what a lot of writers forget is that you also need a vertical component to your story. And this is stuff that grapples with like the meaning of life, confronting the reality of death, or the struggle for authenticity. This vertical component is your theme. Now, Todd Goldberg, who is a crime writer and director of the MFA program in Riverside, he once made fun of theme. He was like, nobody ever goes to a friend of theirs and says, you know why you gotta read this book? The theme is amazing. And I get that. But I do think that books without a strong theme end up being a little thin, a little insubstantial. So we're gonna go over 9 common mistakes that writers often make. And yes, these are frequent mistakes. And by the end, you are going to have a black belt in theme. The first mistake that some writers make is they believe that theme equals topic. There is a certain unnamed corporate blog which is soulless and evil, and on top of that, they make this mistake. They totally confuse the two, thinking that just because you have a topic, that means that is the theme. So look at a book like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now, the topic would be something like science, or maybe something like creation. But I think the theme would probably be better expressed in a sentence, something like scientific advancement without ethical responsibility leads to destruction rather than progress. Or take a look at The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. You could say the topic would be feminism, or maybe women's freedom or something. But the actual theme is better expressed by something like a patriarchal society will reduce women to mere biological capabilities. So ask yourself right now, do you have a topic for your book, or have you actually drilled down to say something about that topic, which is more of a theme? The second mistake that a lot of writers make is believing that you need a theme before you begin writing. Now, there are some writers who end up finding the theme for their book before they start writing, but in general, I think this is actually very rare. Most commonly, writers discover their theme 3/4 of the way through their book, or even after they finish the whole first draft. The danger of coming up with a theme before you even begin the book is probably best summed up by the phrase, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. You want your theme to arise very organically from the telling of your story, rather than deciding, very didactically, this is the point that I want to make in my book. But I do think that if you discover the theme later on, just make sure you go back and revise the beginning to capture that theme from the very get-go. I think of a movie like The Dark Knight, and you could argue that the theme of that story is how difficult it is to fight evil without becoming evil. And in the very first scene of Batman Begins, we see a little Bruce Wayne steal something. He grabs an arrow from a little girl and runs away with it. So the movie's showing a teensy bit of moral compromise from the very beginning, from the very first shot with him. And right after that scene, we see an adult version of him beating up a whole bunch of other prisoners, and then also Harvey Dent's whole turn from good to evil. And just remember, if you need some extra help with your book, take some of my Bookfox Academy courses. There are limits to what I can do on YouTube, and what I can do in a course allows me to really lay out the information better. It allows me to add a lot more PDFs and quizzes to help you learn the information better. So, I know YouTube's great, YouTube's wonderful, I enjoy teaching on YouTube, but if you want the structure of a course, check out the Academy. Now, this third mistake is super common. A lot of writers make it. It is, your theme should be explicitly stated. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a character delivering a single powerful line that encapsulates a lot of what your theme is. But in general, I would say that the theme of your story, think of it as being like in the basement of your story. It affects everything in your story, but it's not actually on display in any sort of very explicit way. In general, you want to show your theme rather than tell your theme. So the danger is that you just start lecturing and the book gets a little bit too preachy, and then the book ends up being joyless rather than entertaining. Now, if you watched a lot of my YouTube videos, you'll probably know that this is the point where I would likely bring up Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged. But then I started thinking, this isn't exactly a problem that is limited to, say, libertarian or conservative books. I mean, there's a large chunk of literary fiction which commits these exact same errors, but just in a more liberal bent. Like a great example would be Tommy Orange's book, There. For the first 20 pages of that book, he just lectures you on this is how Native Americans were treated in the founding of the United States. There's no characters, there's no plot, it's just basically historical information as if it's a nonfiction book, like finger wagging at the reader. So in general, your principle should be to let your narrative do the heavy work of your theme. You want to trust your story to have the power to communicate what it is you're trying to communicate through your book. And if you have a theme about the perils of friendship or betrayal from a close friend, let the story tell that rather than explicitly saying like, hey, watch out for friends, they can betray you. Now this fourth mistake is kind of a tricky one. You're gonna need to let me explain exactly what I mean by it. It is, a theme should be a strongly held conviction. You know, even from the examples I've given in this YouTube video so far, it sounds like a theme is like a very definite position that like there's no wiggle room on at all. And I just want to open up your minds to themes that are phrased maybe more as questions. For instance, look at Night by Elie Wiesel. This is a book about him as a teenager trying to survive the Nazi death camps and the Holocaust. And I think the theme could be expressed as something like, how do you maintain humanity in the face of overwhelming inhumanity? That's a difficult question. I think the book wrestles with that and gives a whole bunch of different answers on it. I do think a theme can also be an exploration rather than a definitive answer. A theme can be multifaceted and wrestle with a topic looking at it from multiple perspectives. For instance, look at Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. This has been called a polyphonic novel. What it means is there's a whole bunch of different voices having different perspectives on this theme, and there's not like a definite answer, the right answer that's being communicated. I mean, really the theme is the struggle between faith and doubt or the search for the meaning of life. But he doesn't attempt to solve this issue as much as he attempts to use all these different characters to explore different facets of this topic. Now, I have one more thing to say about why a theme should not be a strongly held conviction. I think the danger is that you come off with like a really obvious theme that like no one would disagree with. If your theme is something like murder is bad. Or even if your theme is something like, oh, good is better than evil. I mean, these are dumb. These are just, they don't rise to the level of themes. And hey, if you know your theme already for your book, please comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear it. Now, this next mistake is one that dupes a lot of writers. It is number 5. Your protagonist's convictions are your theme. Nope. Nope, I got a whole bucket full of nope for you right now. Your protagonist might be wildly mistaken, right? Their beliefs might be completely opposite of the theme that you're trying to convey. Think of Walter White in Breaking Bad. The theme is something like unchecked personal ambition warps your moral sensibilities. Now, does he think that? No, absolutely not. But the story teaches us that principle. So often your protagonist will have a misbelief, and this misbelief is the opposite of your theme. And as we read the story, we start to see how this main character is in error. And then perhaps by the end of the story, there is a kind of epiphany or character change, and your protagonist realizes that they've made a mistake, and they come around to the theme at the very end of the book. The 6th mistake some writers make with theme is every character should support your theme. So this overlaps a little bit with the protagonist one. But in this case, we're looking at the antagonist or the foil in your story. In a lot of cases, they're going to represent the opposite belief of whatever your theme is communicating. So look at a book like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. There are a bunch of patients in a mental hospital, and they are led by the swaggering, bucket-o'-fun McMurphy. Now, McMurphy believes, and this is honestly the theme of the book, that the individual must fight for their freedom against the crushing weight of institutional control. But McMurphy is opposed by the antagonist, Nurse Ratched. Does she believe in that theme? No, absolutely not. Nurse Ratched believes something much more like institutions must use their power to enforce order, control, and conformity. So it might be a really good exercise for you to take a character like your antagonist and figure out, okay, what is the theme for them? What do they believe? And make sure it is directly opposed to, say, the theme of your book that your protagonist believes or the theme of your book as you conceive of it. And very last point on this topic, remember that every single character in your book can have a slightly different relationship to your theme. For example, say you have a sidekick character in your book. Perhaps they believe in the theme intellectually, but maybe they are too timid or too cowardly to act upon it. So once you have a theme for your book, try coming up with a whole list of characters and figuring out what is each character's relationship to that main theme. I think what you find will probably surprise you and will deepen your understanding of how to write the theme in your book. Now, this next point about theme is a little bit controversial, but hear me out on it. It is number 7. You need multiple themes. So as an editor, there are times when I get a book and I feel like the book is trying to do too much. It's trying to tackle enormous topics and it's trying to tackle a lot of enormous topics. And what ends up happening is that it sort of dilutes the power of the main theme or dilutes the power of the main thrust of the novel. So what I try to do is offer guidance that says, okay, what can we cut from this book to allow the greatest parts of this book to shine through? So I would say that honestly, most of the time, you really only need one main theme. Now, can you have sub-themes? Absolutely. You can have, say, 2 minor themes and then 1 major theme. But I think in your head, it's actually very helpful for you to think, this is the one main theme that I'm really wrestling with in this book. But I will say that this depends upon the size of your book as well. If you are writing this gigantic, sprawling, multi-generational novel like Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, I mean, this book's a doorstopper. So of course you can get away with far more themes than you can get away with something like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which, it's a little teensy book. It's a little fable. Now, this next mistake is very dangerous. It is number 8. You can change your theme. Now, I'm not saying that during the process of writing your book, sometimes you discover something about the theme and then you end up changing it. I mean, that's fine. That's really a natural process of writing. What I'm trying to say is, in your finished, published version of your book, you don't want the first half to be wrestling one particular theme, and then the second half switch to a completely different theme. What this gives the reader is a kind of thematic whiplash. They had bought into the premise of a book thinking, oh, this is what we're dealing with in this book, and then you sort of pull the rug out from underneath them and say, oh, surprise, guess what? Now we're onto this completely different topic. Most of the time, that's going to be a very bad idea. However, if you have examples where you think there's something that breaks that rule, I am all ears. Please leave the names of those stories in the comment section. Now, for our very last mistake when it comes to theme, number 9, resolution just restates your theme. What I find a lot of writers do is that they'll get to the end of their book, they've had the theme strongly throughout the entire novel, and so they feel like in the climax or in the resolution, like this is the point to restate what they've already sort of accomplished. I think that's a big mistake. The resolution is honestly a chance to advance your theme a little bit further than what's been accomplished in your book so far. You can add a twist to the theme. You can add just a little bit extra to the theme. And for an example of this, let's look at And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is actually the 7th best-selling book of all time. Yeah, it's that impressive. The plot of the book is there's basically all these characters on an island and they start getting killed one by one based on the 10 Little Soldiers rhyme. Now, readers might think, from most of the novel, that the theme is something like human capacity for brutality or the inevitability of fate. But spoiler alert, in the very end of the book, they discover this bottle with a message in it. And it's from one of the guests revealing that he was a judge, and the people on this island were people who had gotten off scot-free from doing something heinous. And so he turned himself into judge, jury, and executioner and knocked them all off. So from that epilogue, we see the theme evolve. And suddenly we realize the theme is something much more like justice finds a way even when the conventional legal system fails. Hey, just remember, if you haven't checked out Bookfox Academy yet, click the link in the description. And I'll leave you with this quote from Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, who said, "To produce a mighty work, you must choose a mighty theme." Choose well, my friends.